I'm delighted and honored to welcome our distinguished guests, Deputy High Commissioner of India, Mr. Anshuman Gaur, and the President of Carleton University, Dr. Benoit. Due to his prior travel commitments, the High Commissioner of India could not join us today. A very, very warm welcome to our special guest speakers, Dr. Jeffry Halverson, who is already here, I see, Mr. Faisal Khan, and Dr. Muhammad al-Ninowy. I'm greatly thankful to the Director of the College of Humanities at Carleton University, Dr. Shauna Dolansky, for her support for this panel event, and of course, her ongoing support. The MGPCO is a non-profit charitable organization. Let me remove this here from here. The main objectives of the Peace Council include promoting Gandhian thoughts and principles, educating the Ottawa and surrounding communities in principles and practices of nonviolence, harmony, and peace. And through our new generation leaders arm, create multicultural leaders and to foster leaders that emulate Gandhi's style of leadership. The Peace Council has partnered with the Carleton University to assist in fulfilling these objectives. It has endowed the annual MK Gandhi lecture in the College of the Humanities at Carleton University. A record of MGPC's activities over the years exists on its website. I will quickly go through some of the key events and activities of this year. We had a lecture on turning the tide on nonviolence in education, building capacities for nonviolent leadership by Gilles Carr-Harris on February 20, 2021. Gilles is an activist, academic, and a great leader. We were able to raise $12,000 for corona relief activities of the Ekta Parishad in India, and the funds were transferred through International Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence and Peace to India. Our new generation arm was able to collect 2,600 through Art for India auction. The funds were transferred for COVID relief work of frontline women in India under the Ekta Parishad network of NGOs in India. The paintings were made and donated by local artists. This morning, we had a short garlanding ceremony, although it was raining all through. And as the garlanding ceremony of Gandhi Statue at the Carleton University campus. Now, it was probably not, I'm not sure, because of the rain, maybe there was a lot of fog also, but I am really excited to share that with you, some of the recordings. And a huge thanks to Mr. Anil Agarwal, who is also the founding member of MGPC and always there. He is the one who's made this, took this recording, made this video so quickly. And he's going to now put up the video for everyone to have a look at that.
Just to thank you everyone for coming here this rainy morning and being with us. Rashmi ji, Dr. Umar, again, thank you so much for making sure that we continue with this tradition, small tradition that we have of gathering here every Gandhi Jayanti to pay our respects. So Gandhi means different things to different people. When I first was introduced to him, the truth and his life's message were so obvious to me that I thought they were self-evident. I never thought that there will ever be a time when one would need to justify or explain Gandhi to others, but one has had to do that recently, and Rashmi ji knows that there have been so many currents and questions. But then Gandhi, true Gandhi, is alive when we talk and discuss and debate him, and not when we put him up on a pedestal. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. I wish you all the very best on behalf of my High Commissioner who couldn't be here unfortunately today. But again, thank you so much for organizing this activity, and best wishes to all of you on this day.
Thank you very much.
I'm Rahil Khan, Vice President of the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council. So for the next item on our agenda, I like to welcome the High Commissioner of India to Canada to say a few words.
Hi, thank you, Rahil, for having us here today. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning to garland the statue, and I thank the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council for making it happen. This has been a tradition, this lecture now that we are organizing again, and it's very relevant that we do it. This is a special year for us. We mark the 75th year of India's independence, and that's something where Gandhi was, an integral part of in shaping the soul and the form of my country. But that's not the only thing that we talk of, or we need to talk of Gandhi today. Today is also the International Day of Nonviolence, and Gandhi's greatest gift perhaps was to give the ordinary people a political tool, the tool of satyagraha, to effect change as ordinary people could bring down mighty empires, to say. We would be looking forward to hearing the panelists, and I hope we will have an engaging conversation. Once again, on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, I bring you the greetings of my High Commissioner, who unfortunately could not be here today. But again, thank you so much, Rashmi ji, Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council, for keeping this tradition alive. Thanks, Carleton University. Thanks to the wonderful panelists that we have today and all the guests who are joining us. So without much ado, I hand it back to Rahil.
Thank you very much, Deputy High Commissioner Anshuman Gaur. I'd like to now welcome for a few remarks the President of Carleton University, Dr. Benoit Antoine Bacon, s'il te plaît.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. J'espère que ça va bien. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. And first, my sincere thanks to the esteemed Deputy High Commissioner for being with us today and for your remarks. And please do give my best to His Excellency. At Carleton University, we're very pleased to partner with the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council. And as you just saw in the video that was shared, a symbol of this important partnership is the life-size statue of Gandhi that was installed in front of the beautiful Richcraft Hall on our campus in 2011, already 10 years ago. Many of you will also be familiar with the Canada-India Center for Excellence, which we established in 2010 in collaboration with great leaders from the Indo-Canadian community and in collaboration with the High Commissioner of India. The center promotes policy-relevant research, capacity building, entrepreneurship development, and community engagement that enhances the Canada-India bilateral relationship. And you all know how important that relationship is to Carleton and indeed to Canada. The program was publicly acknowledged by Minister Navdeep Bains during Prime Minister Trudeau's visit to India in February 2018. The center's professional development program provides short, focused training opportunities for Indian students and young professionals. And in the summer of 2019 alone, that was the last summer before the pandemic, of course, we brought over 150 students from across India to Carleton campus to provide training on subjects that included data analytics, cybersecurity, and business strategy. The center has simultaneously built strong academic partnerships with leading Indian universities, including the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Management. At Carleton, we're very proud of our privileged relationship with the Indo-Canadian community and indeed with the great country of India. And today is one of our favorite events of the year. It is really great to be here with you today. As many of you will know, in 2012, the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council endowed the annual Gandhi Lecture on Peace and Humanity at our prestigious College of the Humanities. And since then, the lecture has been held every year in early October around or on, indeed, Gandhi's birthday. Leading scholars from around the world have delivered the Gandhi Lecture. As you know, this year, the lecture is presented in the form of a panel discussion with 3 very distinguished panelists. And on behalf of Carleton University, let me thank all 3 of you for joining us today and for sharing your insights with us. These are my remarks. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate the invitation to join you today. Merci beaucoup. Many thanks to everyone joining us virtually, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benoit, Antoine, back home. Burning questions, which I'm sure will be provoked by our panelists, and my questions to them, you should direct them in the chat to Dr. Heather Eaton, who's the director of the MGPC board, who will read out the questions during the open portion of the morning. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Sonish Azam. One of our panelists, Mr. Faisal Khan from India, will be responding to questions in both English and Hindi. I'll be translating my questions to the panel in both English and Hindi, but Dr. Azam will help translate the Hindi portions of Mr. Khan's answers for our audience. In addition to being a medical science liaison at a major pharmaceutical company here in North America, she is a distinguished doctoral graduate of Aligarh Muslim University in India. So thank you, Dr. Azam, for helping me with the moderation today.
Thank you.
So now I'll just go into introducing our 3 very distinguished panelists who I'm delighted who could make it today for a very important topic. Our first panelist is Mr. Faisal Khan. He is the reviver and national convener of the Khudai Khidmatgar movement of India. Faisal Bhai revived a movement that was originally founded by Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan in the Northwest Frontier Province during India's freedom movement. And Ghaffar Khan is famously known as the Frontier Gandhi. Faisal Khan has tried to revive components of Ghaffar Khan's movement that people may have paid less attention to beyond his well-known protest activities. This includes education, social service, such as pandemic relief, and interreligious understanding and harmony. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Faisal Khan as our first panelist. And just to note to everybody, there are a lot of Khans being mentioned on this panel discussion, and we are not all related. But our second distinguished panelist is Dr. al-Ninowy, who is the founder and director of the Madina Institute, an Islamic seminary located in Atlantic, Georgia, that has campuses across the globe, such as in South Africa, the UK, Norway, and Malaysia. He is considered an accomplished scholar of Hadith, that is the literature on the sayings and deeds of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as well as other aspects of Islamic learning, such as Sufi sciences. He's been a pioneer working on at the grassroots level to bring unconditional compassion and love as the central themes of religion, and has been actively promoting nonviolence among all people and religions of the world. So I'd like to welcome you too, Dr. Ninowy. Last but not least is Dr. Jeffry Halverson, who is a professor of religious studies, specifically of Islamic studies, in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the Coastal Carolina University in South Carolina. In addition to his many journal articles, Dr. Halverson is the author of a number of important books on Islam, covering the topics of theology and the creed of Islam, Muslim nonviolence, and about the narratives used by militant extremists. But for our session, what's of particular relevance is a 2012 book called Searching for a King, about Muslim nonviolence and the future of Islam, where he tries to answer the question of where is the Muslim Gandhi? And maybe he'll be able to answer that question today for us as well. So thank you, Dr. Halverson. I've talked enough. So I'd like to kick off our moderator's panel, first by having each of our panelists give some opening remarks, about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll go into some of my prearranged questions, which the panelists actually are familiar with before the session. So I'd like to start off with Mr. Faisal Khan, if you'd like to provide some opening remarks. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Faisal bhai. We can hear
मेरी
you.
आवाज आ रही?
जी आ रही
हाँ,
है।
हाँ, तो मैं महात्मा गांधी पीस काउंसिल का हमारे जो पैनलिस्ट हैं, हमारे जो डिप्टी हाई कमिश्नर हैं, मैं सबका बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ और कि आज इंटरनेशनल डे ऑफ नॉन वायलेंस के दिन हमने ये जिस मौजू पे हम नॉन वायलेंस के बोलने जा रहे हैं, मुझे लगता है कि नॉन वायलेंस सबसे पहले जिसके दिल में आया होगा वो इंसान या वो शख्स वो होगा जो दुनिया से बहुत प्यार करता होगा। महात्मा गांधी ने भी कहा है और ये एक यूनिवर्सल ट्रुथ है कि नॉन वायलेंस की बुनियाद दो चीजों पर है। एक तो है प्यार करना, यानी मोहब्बत करते हैं अगर आप दुनिया से, और दूसरे है माफ कर देने का जज्बा। अगर आप ये दो बुनियादें आपके अंदर नहीं है तो आप कभी भी नॉन वायलेंस को प्रैक्टिस नहीं कर सकते हैं। एक तो दुनिया से बेहद प्यार, इंसानियत से मोहब्बत, और दूसरा माफ कर देने का जज्बा। ये दो बुनियादें हैं। और मुझे लगता है जहां तक गांधी के जो मुस्लिम फॉलोअर थे, मैंने जब खुदाई खिदमतगार एज ए गांधीयन जब मैं अपने को कंपेयर करता हूं कि क्या गांधीयन या गांधी की जो वैल्यूज थी नॉन वायलेंस की, अहिंसा की, उन पे चलते हुए कहीं मेरा कोई कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन होता है इस्लाम से, तो मुझे लगता है कि नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं होता है। क्योंकि मैं एज ए मुसलमान जब मैं सोचता हूँ तो प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने कहा है अल खल्क़ु कुल्लुहुम अयाल अल्लाह, ये सारी इंसानियत अल्लाह की फैमिली है। और मुझे अल्लाह ताला कहते हैं कि मुझे वो इंसान प्यारा है, वो इंसान पसंद है जो अल्लाह की मखलूक को फ़ायदा पहुंचाए। और इसी तरह कुरान शरीफ में है जब मुसलमान कैसा हो, एक आइडियल मुसलमान, तो उसको बताते पे अल्लाह ताला का इरशाद है वयुनफिकून फिस्सर्राई वज़्ज़र्राई वल काज़िमीन अल गैज़ वल आफ़ीन अनन नास वल्लाहु युहिब्बुल मुहसिनीन। यानी वो लोग जो अपने गुस्से, जो लोग हर तरह से लोगों पे खर्च करते हैं, अपने गुस्से को पी जाते हैं और लोगों को माफ और दरगुजर करते हैं। तो मुझे लगता नहीं है कि नॉन वायलेंस का आइडिया कहीं भी इस्लाम से टकराता है, बल्कि इस्लाम, मुझे अगर मुझसे आप पूछेंगे कि इस्लाम क्या है, तो मैं कहूँगा इंसानियत की खिदमत करने का, नॉन वायलेंट तरीके से इंसानियत की खिदमत करने का तरीका ही इस्लाम है। और गांधी जी के जो फॉलोअर थे, जिसमें खान अब्दुल गफ्फार को दुनिया जानती है, जिनको हम फ्रंटियर गांधी कहते हैं, इनके अलावा बहुत से ऐसे लोग थे जिनको हम उतना मशहूर नहीं हुए। उसमें बीबी अम्तुस्सलाम का नाम जबरदस्त है। जब गांधी जी ने नवाखाली में वो चीज, गांधी जी के नवाखाली के एक्शन को देख के मतलब वो यकीन नहीं होता है कि कैसे एक खून के प्यासे लोगों को एक दूसरे के गांधी जी ने मोहब्बत करने वालों में बदल दिया था बहुत थोड़े से वक्त में। तो उस वक्त गांधी जी के साथ बीबी अम्तुस्सलाम थी। इसी तरह से अमीर सुबहानी, ये बॉम्बे के एक रहने वाले थे, बिजनेसमैन थे बुनियादी तौर पे। इनके बारे में गांधी ने कहा था कि इनके काम की बहुत तारीफ की थी। मौलाना आजाद को हम जानते हैं, मौलाना आजाद का कंस्ट्रक्टिव वर्क से ज्यादा प्लूरलिज्म में, यानी कैसे डाइवर्सिटी को आप कैसे, कुछ लोग ये समझते हैं कि इस्लाम डाइवर्सिटी का विरोधी है, जबकि मैं ये कहता हूं कि डाइवर्सिटी तो एन इस्लाम कभी, मुझे लगता है कि इस्लाम डाइवर्सिटी को प्रमोट करता है। तिल का रुस्ल फज़्ज़ल, बहुत सी ऐसी आयतें और हदीस हमें मिलते हैं जिसमें किसी को, जैसे आप पढ़ेंगे कुरान शरीफ में लकुम दीनुकुम वलिय दीन, तुम्हें तुम्हारा दीन हमें। तो इस तरह से वो सारी चीजें जिनकी गांधी वकालत कर रहे थे, जिनको गांधी प्रमोट कर रहे थे, जिनको गांधी, जिनके लिए गांधी ने आखिर में अपनी जान भी दे दी 30 जनवरी 1948 को, गांधी मोहब्बत के लिए कुर्बान हो गए, गांधी इंसानियत के लिए उन्होंने अपना बलिदान कर दिया, उन सारी बुनियादों को मैं आज, आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट पास्ट, मैं अभी उनको प्रैक्टिकल कर रहा हूँ। तो मुझे नहीं लगता है कि मुझे एज ए प्रैक्टिकल मुसलमान मैं जितना मान सकता हूँ, जितना भी मैं चल सकता हूँ, ज्यादा से ज्यादा मैं कोशिश करता हूँ कि एक मुसलमान बन के मैं रहूं, लेकिन साथ में अगर गांधी के उसूलों को मैं अपनाता हूं तो मुझे कहीं से कोई कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी नहीं लगती है बात, बल्कि इस्लाम मुझे ताकत देता है। ला यरहमल्लाह, प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने फरमाया, ला यरहमल्लाह वलाकिन यरहमल लिन्नास, लोगों पे जब तक रहम नहीं करोगे तब तक ऊपर वाला अल्लाह ताला भी तुम पे रहम नहीं करेगा। बहुत सी ऐसी चीजें हैं जो, तो मुझे नहीं लगता है कहीं कि ये हाँ, ये मैं ये मानता हूँ कि वो जो ट्रेडिशन था वो इस्लाम में क्यों रुक गया, कैसे रुक गया, तो ये एक बहस की चीज हो सकती है कि वो बहुत फैला नहीं। यानी जो फ्रंटियर गांधी की आवाज थी, या जो बीबी अब्दुल की आवाज थी, या जो मौलाना आजाद की आवाज थी, वो आवाज बहुत फैली नहीं जितना उसको फैलना चाहिए था, और उसका नुकसान पूरी दुनिया को उठाना पड़ा, इंसानियत को उठाना पड़ा। तो ये तो मैं मानता हूं, लेकिन मुझे नहीं लगता कि कोई ऐसा उसूल जो गांधी जिसको सत्याग्रह कह रहे थे, जिसको गांधी नॉन वायलेंस कह रहे थे, वो इस्लाम से और उसमें कहीं आपस में कॉन्ट्राडिक्शंस है। तो यही मुझे जब मैं, आप अगर मुझसे पूछेंगे कि तुम खिदमत खल्क क्यों करते हो, तो मैं कहूँगा मैं इसलिए करता हूँ कि मुझे अल्लाह ताला को राजी करने का इसके अलावा कोई दूसरा रास्ता समझ में ही नहीं आता है। मुझे अल्लाह ताला की तरफ से ये रास्ता मिला है कि मैं लोगों की गांधी जी से भी किसी ने पूछा था कि आप ये सब क्यों करते हैं, तो गांधी ने कहा था मैं अपनी मोक्ष के लिए कर रहा हूँ, यानी रिलीजियस जो मोक्ष होती है, मैं उसके लिए ये सब कर रहा हूँ। तो मैं, अगर आप मुझसे कहें कि आपको इस्लाम, कहीं ना कहीं इस्लाम और ये जो नॉन वायलेंस है या पीस है या डाइवर्सिटी है, इसमें कहीं पे कोई तजाद दिखता है, कोई कंट्राडिक्टरी चीजें, तो मुझे नहीं लगती है। मैं इसको ऐसा नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि किसी और को भी नहीं लगती होगी, लेकिन मुझे ऐसा नहीं लगता है। तो ये बहुत ज़रूरी बहस है, ये बहुत ज़रूरी मौजू है जो इस वक्त आप लोग ने शुरू किया है। पूरी दुनिया को इस वक्त मोहब्बत की ज़रूरत है, पूरी इंसानियत को इस वक्त अगर किसी एक चीज़ की सबसे ज़्यादा ज़रूरत है तो वो मोहब्बत है, वो मोहब्बत है, और वो लोगों को प्यार करना है। गांधी जी कहते थे मेरे कामों का मकसद लोगों को सर्वोदय, जिसको गांधी कहते थे, गांधी की फिलॉसफी ऑफ सर्वोदय, तो राइज फॉर ऑल, तो उसमें इस्लाम मुझे कहीं ऐसे नहीं दिखता है कि आप देखिए जब प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ताइफ गए थे अपनी बात, when peoples were throwing a stone on him, और वो he was making दुआ for them, तो यही सत्याग्रह है। यानी अपनी बात कहने में अभी इतना वक्त नहीं है, वरना मैं सत्याग्रही गांधी कहते हैं, यानी जो नॉन वायलेंस को और गांधी के सारे जो टेक्निक्स हैं उनको जो इम्प्लीमेंट करेगा उसको गांधी सत्याग्रही कहते हैं। तो एक सत्याग्रही कैसा हो, मुझे इससे अच्छी उसकी कोई डिफिनेशन नहीं लगती जो कुरान शरीफ ने कही है, वयुनफिकून फिस्सर्राई वज़्ज़र्राई वलकाज़िमीन अलगैज़ वलाफ़ीन अनन्नास वल्लाहु युहिब्बुल मुहसिनीन। ऐसा लगता है कि अल्लाह ताला सत्याग्रही के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं कि वो लोगों के लिए खर्च करता है, वो लोगों को देता है, वो चाहे किसी भी हालत में हो, चाहे उसके पास हो या ना हो, वो अपने गुस्से को पी जाता है, वो लोगों को माफ कर देता है। तो यही बातें मुझे लगता है एक सत्याग्रही की जब गांधी ने परिभाषा दी है, एक सत्याग्रही के बारे में जब गांधी ने बात की है, तो यही बातें की हैं। और मैं अब और ज्यादा आपका वक्त न लेते हुए मैं फिर से ये कहूँगा कि ये बहुत अहम मौजू आपने छेड़ा है, बहुत मौजू इस वक्त आपने ये उठाया है, और इसकी पूरी दुनिया को, क्या हिंदुस्तान, क्या पूरी दुनिया, आज इसकी पूरी दुनिया को जरूरत है कि हम डाइवर्सिटी को रिस्पेक्ट करें, डाइवर्सिटी को जिएं, डाइवर्सिटी को सेलिब्रेट करें, और नॉन वायलेंस, दुनिया का हर मोहब्बत करने वाला, अगर आप उससे पूछे कि दुनिया में वो उसको कोई विकल्प, कोई अल्टरनेट ही नहीं दिखेगा नॉन वायलेंस का। जो लोग ये कहते हैं कि नॉन वायलेंस ताकतवर नहीं है, मुझे लगता है कहीं ना कहीं उनका इंसानियत और मोहब्बत में यकीन नहीं होता है। इफ आई एम ए बिलीवर इन ह्यूमैनिटी एंड लव, तो मैं ये कहूंगा कि दुनिया में सिर्फ एक रास्ता है, वो नॉन वायलेंस का रास्ता है। और जहां तक मैं पिछले 25 साल से देख रहा हूं, मुझे इस्लाम और नॉन वायलेंस में कहीं कोई आपस में टकराव नहीं दिखा है। इसी के साथ मैं आप सबका फिर से एक बार शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं, और मुझे बहुत खुशी होगी कि कोई और भी दूसरों को मैं सुनूं, और आपके जो सवाल होंगे, जो मुझे लगता है, मैं हर बात का तो जवाब मेरे पास नहीं है, लेकिन जो मैंने जिया है, जो मैं कर रहा हूं, उसी पस मंजर में मैं आपको जवाब भी देने की कोशिश करूंगा। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
Shukriya, Faisal Bhai. Also, people may have been distracted. I think Faisal Bhai has an auto translate function, or maybe it's been activated accidentally for us. So if you see some text on the bottom, that's kindly just ignore it. It's just for some reason reading our words. So I'd like to now pivot to our next panelist, Dr. Ninowy. Dr. Ninowy, if you could offer some opening remarks, about 5 to 10 minutes, please.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. Honored and privileged, Rahil, and very pleased to hear about the work that you all do out there with the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council of Ottawa. I think we meet on many aspects, obviously, and I would argue that obviously that Islam is by definition a non-violent faith, and the Sufi tradition throughout the Muslim tradition has been the vocal non-violent voices for those who are looking for the Muslim Gandhis. I think it's very important to look at maybe a couple of things here, and when we talk about peace and non-violence, because the word peace or peacemaking may mean different things to different people. To some people, it means a habitual inner gentleness, or living in harmonious community, tranquility of order, maybe. And to some people, peace merely means the liberty to exploit other people without fear of retribution or interference. To others, peace means the freedom to rob others without interruption. To still others, it means the leisure to devour the goods of the earth without being compelled to interrupt their pleasures to feed those whom their greed is starving. And to practically everybody, peace simply means the absence of any physical violence that might cast a shadow over their lives, devoted, let's say, to the satisfaction of animal appetites, lower self-desires for comfort and pleasure. Indeed, there are people who are outright cynical in invoking peace or peacemaking rhetoric. For instance, lots of politicians have often engaged in peace talk in order to cover up their non-peaceful purposes or activities. Simply, we can see when we look at peacemaker awards being handed out to people who've advocated violence or wars. I think there's an important aspect here to look at and examine when we look at peace and non-violence. On one hand, here, obviously, people of faith are far too eager to distance themselves from extremists or violent people in their own community, often denying that religious violence has any religious motivation whatsoever. And this is true in most people of faith, including Muslims, who often glibly dismiss those who commit acts of terror in the name of Islam as not really Muslims. And this is the stand of the absolute vast majority of Muslims in the world, obviously. On the other hand, critics of religion, and specifically Islamophobes, tend to exhibit an inability to understand religion outside of their own narrative of it. They scour scriptures or religious texts for bits of things that could be taken out, texts that could be taken out of context, and point to extreme examples of religious bigotry, of which there are plenty for all people to take out of context. The text out of context is always a pretext. What both the believers and the critics often miss is that religion is often far more a matter of identity nowadays than it is actually a matter of belief and practices, theology. The phrase, I am Muslim, or for someone to say I'm Christian or I'm Jew, or I am Hindu or I am Buddhist, whatever people say that they believe reflecting their faith, is like often not so much a description of what a person utterly embodies or wholly adheres to as a theology, as a simple statement of identity and how the speaker views themselves or their place in this world. No religion exists in a vacuum. On the contrary, every faith is rooted in the soil in which it is planted. And it's a fallacy, therefore, to believe that people of faith derive their values primarily from their scriptures or from their religious sources. The opposite may be very true. If I want to say, and let me finish with this, all faith systems, not just Islam, have been often pointed to as the cause of all wars throughout human history. In fact, the causes of conflict and wars and violence are usually greed, envy, and ambition. But in an effort to sanitize these self-serving emotions, we often cloak them in religious rhetoric. This is how the masses are mobilized. Though this is not a new phenomenon, the abuse of religion has always been there, but that's just what it is. The issue is really not the faith, in my view, itself. Most of faith systems have a basic central theme of love and compassion. But I think I apologize about that, but I think the issue here is the interpretation of faith rather than the faith itself. So I'll stop here and thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ninowy. I'd like to now welcome Dr. Halverson to provide his opening remarks.
Good morning from South Carolina in the United States. And let me begin by saying thank you to the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council for inviting me to join this very important panel. These conversations are so important, especially in light of various challenges that we're facing around the world. For my part in this panel, I'd like to discuss the concept of Islamic nonviolence as it is expressed in the writings of the late Wahiduddin Khan, who tragically passed away in India earlier this year due to COVID-19. But before I do so, I'd like to make some remarks about Islamic nonviolence as a general concept to clarify what exactly I mean by this phrase, which can mean different things to different people. And I want to make clear that when I say Islamic nonviolence, I'm not talking about pacifism or quietism. I'm talking about a particular method or mode of activism and resistance. Both the Quran and the Sunnah emphasize the importance of effort, of striving, of exerting oneself to do what is right and to overcome hardship and the challenges of everyday life in this world or this dunya. And even if you fail, there's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad that says that it's your intention, your niyyah, that matters the most. This effort, this exertion, this striving is called jihad. And a Muslim must strive or exert himself or herself every day to face the challenges of human existence. These challenges may range from something mundane like laziness and anger and impatience to something greater like economic hardship, hunger and abuse, all the way up to the worst types of injustices and the horrors of war. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have described the day-to-day struggle of every Muslim to do what's right and to overcome temptation and despair and impatience and other vices as jihad al-akbar, the greater jihad, or the jihad al-nafs, that is the struggle against one's shortcomings, one's lower self. And it is this jihad, this struggle, that never ends. It's perpetual. It's something you're engaged in every day, and it doesn't stop until you reach the end of your life. As circumstances arise in life, new modes of jihad may prove necessary, utilizing the tongue, by which I mean speech, the pen, or yes, even the sword. The core question is, what is the most appropriate mode or best method for Muslims to utilize in the face of a particular challenge or obstacle? It might be that every mode of jihad is justified under certain circumstances. For example, if Muslims are targeted for genocide. However, in ayah in Surah 42 of the Quran states, let harm be repaid with an equal harm, but anyone who forgives and put things right will have his reward from God. Elsewhere in Surah 41, the Quran states, the good deed and the evil deed are not equal. Repel the evil deed with one which is ahsan, better. Then truly those where there was once enmity will become like close friends. What does this mean? Well, this means that even when violence may be justified in particular circumstances, the old formula, an eye for an eye, the Quran urges Muslims to choose the better method, that which is ahsan in the given circumstances. And so it's not my contention that warfare or jihad al-sayf, that is the struggle of the sword, is forbidden in Islam, because I certainly don't think that's true. My view is that nonviolence is a tactic, a mode, or a method of jihad that is better, ahsan, than violence. And this is especially true in light of the devastatingly lethal and destructive powers of modern warfare, which includes nuclear weapons that can indiscriminately kill the population of entire countries in minutes. So, having said that, allow me to turn now to Maulana Wahiduddin Khan and briefly discuss some of his, some details of his work on Islamic nonviolence. In 1948, the year that Mahatma Gandhi was tragically assassinated, Wahiduddin Khan was 23 years old and had graduated from a madrasa near Azamgarh in northern India just 4 years prior. Remaining in India, Khan was involved with various Islamic revivalist groups before he started his own center in New Delhi in the 1970s, publishing a series of journals and dozens of books. In fact, I think the unofficial total is 200 books, quite impressive. In the coming years, Khan promoted a vision of Islam that emphasized the pursuit of moral virtue instead of the pursuit of political power. For Khan, patience, or sabr, is the most important virtue in the entire Quran. It denotes a peaceful, non-violent response to obstacles and conflicts in life. The propagation of Islam, or dawah, is rooted in patience, because forcing people to accept Islam or your particular views or your politics is inherently an act of impatience. In support of his view, Wahiduddin Khan cites the Quran's use of the word jihad in Surah 25, ayah 52, which states, perform jihad with this most strenuously. The this here is the Quran. The Quran, of course, is not an object to be thrown or a weapon to use for acts of violence. As Khan writes, quote, performing jihad with the Quran would mean an ideological struggle to conquer people's hearts and minds through Islam's superior philosophy, unquote. Wahiduddin Khan thus divorces jihad from violence. Instead, he identifies violence with the terms fasad, strife, and qital, fighting, in the Quran. Pointing to Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, Ayah 205, Khan notes that the Quran explicitly condemns fasad, And he argues that violence is never permissible except by necessity as a defensive measure against an aggressor. Therefore, violence is never legitimate as a means to propagate or reform Islam or to transform a society. As Khan writes, rebutting the ideas of figures like Ayman al-Zawahiri, quote, "This notion of a reformist war is totally alien to the whole of the Quran and the Hadith," unquote. Reform and social change, he contends, can only be achieved through preaching, persuasion, and virtuous conduct. For Wahiduddin Khan, the teachings of Islam focus on the transformation of people's thinking and consciousness through advice, exhortation, and guidance. To support this view, Khan cites this tragic event known as the Mongol catastrophe, which occurred in the 13th century, when the Mongols, or Tartars, marched across Persia and Iraq and besieged and destroyed the city of Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Mongols, of course, massacred the Muslims who opposed them and executed the last Abbasid caliph after taking the city in 1258. Militarily, the Muslims were defeated by the Mongols. However, as Wahiduddin Khan interprets these events, Muslim dawah efforts then resumed over the years that followed. The peaceful propagation of the teachings of Islam, the demonstration of virtuous conduct, conquered the Mongol rulers of the region by converting them. For Khan, this event exemplifies how Muslims should achieve change through patience and persuasion and not through violence. When examining Muslim conceptions of nonviolence, it's very common to find a special emphasis on the Meccan surahs of the Quran, the sections that the Prophet Muhammad conveyed from the year 610 to 622, the year of the Hijrah. However, Wahiduddin Khan points to events from the Medinan period as well. In 628 of the Common Era, during the height of the war between the cities of Mecca and Medina, the Prophet Muhammad concluded a peace treaty with the pagan Quraysh tribe. This agreement is known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. A majority of the ulama, the scholars, have identified this treaty as the clear victory mentioned in the first ayah of Surah 48 of the Quran. For Wahiduddin Khan, this treaty exemplifies the righteous path of reconciliation and life over the path of war and death. He writes, quote, "The Hudaybiyah treaty method is the only method for success in the present day world," unquote. In Khan's view, Muslims must be ready to adapt and adjust to the circumstances of life in this world like a flowing stream, to follow opportunities and to not waste time on conflict and confrontations. He writes, quote, "If the Hudaybiyah treaty method is life, then confrontation and war are nothing but death," unquote. Therefore, Khan argues that Muslims must reject violence, especially in light of the circumstances of the modern age. One of the hallmarks of the present age is globalization, which has produced unprecedented interaction between diverse peoples and cultures. Human beings today must understand how to live and interact with each other in a peaceful and productive, constructive manner like never before. As Khan states, quote, "To attempt to eliminate differences is to act against not a particular community, but rather against a universal law of nature. That is why pragmatism demands that as far as the issue of religious and cultural differences is concerned, we must abide by the principle of tolerance rather than engage in confrontation," unquote. And with that, I'll conclude my opening remarks, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Halverson. So I want to thank our three panelists for that, those stimulating opening thoughts. There's much food for thought. Also, I hope people notice I've turned off this annoying subtitle function. That was a bit of a technical glitch from our side, so apologize. And now I'd like to go into the moderated part of our session. As mentioned, I'll be asking our three panelists several prepared questions, and I'll ask them both in English and in Hindi, with Dr. Azam helping to translate Mr. Faisal Khan's answers. So I'd like to ask a slightly provocative question to our three panelists, which all three have kind of already addressed in their opening remarks. So my first question is, what is Islamic nonviolence? If Islam is inherently a religion of peace, why would we want to speak about quote unquote a nonviolent Islam? Is Islamic nonviolence something already within the religion, or is it something that needs to be brought into the religion from the outside? So I'll repeat that in English and then I'll translate it in Hindi for Mr. Khan. So what is Islamic nonviolence? If Islam is inherently a religion of peace, why should we speak of a nonviolent Islam? Is Islamic nonviolence something already within the religion, or is it something that needs to be brought into the religion from outside, such as from Mahatma Gandhi? So in Hindi, Islami ahimsa का आपकी नजर में क्या मतलब है? अगर इस्लाम सहज तौर पर एक शांति पसंद धर्म है, तो फिर हम इस्लामी अहिंसा की बात ही क्यों कर रहे हैं? क्या इस्लामी अहिंसा इस्लाम धर्म का अंश है, या ये बाहर से प्रभावित करती है? So again, इस्लामी अहिंसा का आपकी नजर में क्या मतलब है? अगर इस्लाम सहज तौर पर एक शांति पसंद धर्म है, तो फिर हम इस्लामी अहिंसा की बात ही क्यों कर रहे हैं? क्या इस्लामी अहिंसा इस्लाम धर्म का अंश है, या ये बाहर से प्रभावित करती है? So I'd like to offer. I'd like to offer. Faisal bhai, I'd like to offer you to answer the question first.
देखिए, अहिंसा अपने आप में कुछ, अहिंसा की बुनियादें हैं। अगर वो बुनियादें आपके समाज में एग्जिस्ट करती हैं, तो आपको ये कोई, इस्लाम ने तो इस्लामिक अहिंसा या अहिंसा इन ट्राइबल पीपल, ये तो आप कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि कहीं ना कहीं अहिंसा को, मैं अहिंसा को, आई एम ए प्योरली सोशल एक्टिविस्ट, आई एम नॉट ए रिलीजियस स्कॉलर, तो मैं अपने हर एक्शन में देखता हूं कि वो अहिंसा की बुनियादें हैं। आप इंसानियत से प्यार करते हो, आप इंसानियत को माफ करने का जज्बा रखते हो, तो ये अहिंसा ही होगी, और इसमें कहीं भी मुझे नहीं लगता है। अब आप कहोगे कि लड़ाइयां, इस्लाम में बहुत लड़ाइयां लड़ी गई हैं, तो जब हम उनका ऑब्जर्वेशन करते हैं, देयर इज एक बहुत, प्रोफेसर वीएन पांडे की एक जबरदस्त किताब है, मुझे हमेशा बहुत शिकायत रहती थी इस्लाम की जंगों के वाले हिस्से से, लेकिन वो मेरे जहन की सफाई हुई वो प्रोफेसर वीएन पांडे की जब मैंने किताब पढ़ी, इस्लामिक जंगे जिनको हम कहते हैं, उनके बारे में, कि वो किस तरह डिफेंसिव थी, वो खंदक खोद रहे हैं अपने चारों तरफ। तो इस्लामिक नॉन वायलेंस कोई इस्लाम के अंदर से, बाकी लोग कहते हैं, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि नॉन वायलेंस की बुनियादें, और गांधी का नॉन वायलेंस पे भी बहुत डिबेट है, किस तरह का होगा नॉन वायलेंस, किसे आप नॉन वायलेंस कहोगे, तो मुझे जहां, मतलब एक, अगर आप ये सवाल पूछ रहे हैं, आपका सवाल बिल्कुल जायज है कि अगर इस्लाम एक अमन का मजहब है, और बहुत सी चीजें ये होता है कि किसके हाथ में है, व्हेन निजामुद्दीन औलिया इज टॉकिंग अबाउट समथिंग, तो वो धर्म की बहुत ज्यादा, मजहब का बहुत ज्यादा ये भी होता है कि वो किसके हाथ में है, किसके हाथ में वो अथॉरिटी है। तो मुझे लगता है कि अगर अभी मैं बहुत से नौजवानों को, मुसलमान, कश्मीर से लेके कन्याकुमारी तक हजारों नौजवान जो हैं, और मैं उनको मस्जिद में बैठ के जब पीस और नॉन वायलेंस की बात करता हूं, तो वो कोई सवाल नहीं करते हैं। अब अगर आप कोई और बात उनके जहनों में डालोगे तो वो उसको ले लेंगे। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बात तो मैं आपकी एग्री करता हूं कि इस्लाम के नॉन वायलेंस और पीस और कंस्ट्रक्टिव वर्क वाले हिस्से को ज्यादा बताया नहीं गया। मैं आपको, इफ आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट चाइल्ड,
We lost the voice.
हल्फिल फुदूल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, उसका काम ही था कि वो पीस के लिए काम करेगा। 3 प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के नबी बनने से पहले उसका बुनियादी काम था कि वो अमन के लिए काम करेगा, वो पीस के लिए काम करेगा। तो मुझे लगता है मैं अपना मैं पूरी दुनिया की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, मैं कश्मीर में जाके भी जब नॉन वायलेंस की बात करता हूँ तो कोई मुझसे ना बहस करता है और ना कोई ऐसा मुझे लगता है कि मुझे कोई अपनी एक्स्ट्रा सफाई देना पड़ेगी। तो मुझे लगता है कि धर्म के नाम से मैं जो पॉलिटिकल जो सारा कुछ होता है और जो उसको हम धर्म से जब मिलाते हैं तो मुझे लगता है कि दिक्कत पैदा होती है। लेकिन मुझे कहीं नहीं लगता है कि इस्लाम में नॉन वायलेंस के लिए कोई नेचुरल जगह नहीं है, हम कोई फिट कर रहे हैं। कुछ लोगों को ऐसा लगता है इफ आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट पीस नॉन वायलेंस तो हम सही चीज नहीं बयान कर रहे हैं, हम कुछ एक्स्ट्रा उसमें ऐड कर रहे हैं। तो मुझे ऐसा नहीं लगता है। मुझे लगता है कि इस्लाम में पीस और नॉन वायलेंस के लिए बहुत स्कोप है, बहुत रास्ता है और वो पीस और नॉन वायलेंस ही की बात करता है।
शुक्रिया फैसल भाई,
सॉरी अगर आपको
just a reminder, people, Faisal Bhai is actually calling in from Delhi, India, and it's nighttime there. Dr. Azam, would you like to summarize that for our audience in English?
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Thank you, Faisal Bhai. I'll try to summarize this. In short, what you're trying to say is, so nonviolence actually is the foundation of the community or society. There are different components of nonviolence. For example, forgiveness, for example, kindness. These are the components. So it's not something that you bring from outside. It's actually present within the community or society. And he also says that he was bothered by Islamic wars and fights, and he had questions about it. And Dr. V.N. Pandey's book actually brought clarity to his thoughts. So he's recommending that book. And he also, Faisal Bhai also says that it depends who's the authority of Islam, what is being highlighted about the religion. And so when he speaks to the Muslim youth at the mosque, or even he went to Kashmir and he spoke people in Kashmir, nobody argued with him against peace and against non-violence. They all accepted it. So he says non-violence is a part of Islam, definitely. And he also says that it's more or less political. So politics is being mixed with religion a lot here. And at the end, he said, if he talks about peace and non-violence, it's not that he's forcing anything onto the religion, he's adding a different component. It's actually within Islam. And it all depends what you're highlighting from the religion. Is that correct, Faisal Bhai?
Yes.
Thank
you.
Yes.
And Dr. Azam is here also to correct my Hindi. And what I meant to say to Faisal Bhai, aapka jawab bahut acha tha.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
So I'd like to turn now to Dr. Ninowy for his answer to the question.
First of all, Islam recognizes the nature of the human being. And the nature of the human being is the enablement of choice by the creator of all. The enablement of choice, as the Quran mentions, means you're able to do good and you're able to do evil. Equally so, the test is in the choice that you're making. That enablement needs to be guided, because so that we actually out of the mercy of the creator, he didn't just enable you to do good while enabling you to do evil as well, but also guided you to do evil. So therefore, the Quran specifically addressed the issue of bad choices, among them violence. And with all Abrahamic faith systems, we have the common story of Adam and the two children of Adam killing each other. Cain and Abel, obviously not killing each other here. Cain is the one who killed his brother. The Quran actually mentions that in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is, I believe, number 528, as a symbol of the Islamic approach to violence. Now Abel or Habil is telling his brother, if you are to extend your hand to kill me, I will not extend my hand to kill you, for I am conscious of the rules of the Lord of the world. And that shows us then obviously the right choice versus the not so right choice. And therefore, I think it's important to understand that a faith system did not just come in abstract, but it came actually to deal with people and what people are enabled to do, and to provide solutions and to provide guidance. And to say as if humanity is entirely immune to violence is contrary to human history. So therefore, faith systems dealt with that. And therefore, the Quran also mentions, whoever man ahsanu qawlan mimman da'a ila Allah, who's better than those who actually call unto their Lord and do good, positive contribution, amila salih, right? And you see the peace and nonviolence. Again, I like to connect them both here, are actually an Islamic objective for those legal theorists or usulis who look at Islamic objectives. Al-maqasid, la unf itself, non-violence is actually an objective, a maqsad of the faith, because you see, when violence happens, you're going to have bloodshed, there's going to be innocent people killed, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be crimes, etc., etc., and all that is directly contrary to the Islamic objectives and sort of the frame that it came to teach its followers. And the Prophet or Islam actually itself, on the tongue of the Prophet ﷺ, forbade anything that actually distorts peace, community peace, or anything that actually forbade anything that would invoke fear or terror in other people, for example, regardless. And that is for simply keeping the most important two endowments or the grace of the Lord, which was أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف in Surah Quraysh. He fed them from so that they're not starving, and he gave them safety, peace, so that they're not terrorized. And hence the symbol, let me finish with this, the symbol of the prophetic or the mission statement of the prophetic commission was, as in Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah number 107, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have sent you, O Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but as an unconditional compassion to the worlds, and unconditional compassion negates, by definition, violence.
Thank you, Dr. Ninowy. Another very thought-provoking answer. And now to you, Dr. Halverson.
Thank you. Yeah, so I kind of answered this question in my opening remarks, but I'll add some further thoughts. And so first of all, in terms of is what we call nonviolence something that can be found within Islam, or is it something that has to be brought in or introduced? And what I would say is that, of course, what we would label as nonviolence is already there in Islam. Right. I mentioned some of the specific examples. For example, Bacha Khan or Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who Mr. Faisal Khan discussed, talked about how, people asked him that question and they said, is nonviolence in Islam? And he said, of course, the Prophet Muhammad practiced this for, 12 years in Mecca before he went to Medina. Right? So of course it's there. And what I would say is that the cores of nonviolence, its virtues are there, but it is one of these options, right? And that's how I described it in my opening remarks, that it's a particular tactic, a mode, a type of engagement that is a matter of choice, right? That you have this ability to choose, as was just described, and it's a tactic that one can use. But at the same time, the Quran and the Prophet acknowledge the reality of this world, which is that violence is sadly, a part of the human race. In fact, Shaykh Dr. Saeed talked about how this is the path of Cain, right? That this is this stems all the way back to that story of the two sons of Adam. And human societies require someone to defend the community, someone to maintain security, someone to maintain law and order. And it's a bit of a modern luxury, especially in the secular age, for people to commit to nonviolence when they have a state that's going to do all the violence for them, right? So you could say Christianity is nonviolent. Sure, because you don't need the church defending you and fighting criminals and things like that, because you have the American government doing that, right? So suddenly you can kind of conveniently push that off on the state, that the state in modern times becomes has a monopoly on violence, at least legitimate violence. And so you have the luxury of then saying, well, my religion is all about nonviolence, but that very easily sort of stumbles into a type of hypocrisy. You know, we could have an American Christian who talks about Christianity being a religion of peace and nonviolence, but at the same time, it's American Christians who are carrying out the violence of the state, who are fighting the wars. And either they are apostatizing from Christianity in doing so, or they are forgetting one identity, or only putting on one identity when they go to church. And then when they put on the military uniform, suddenly they're doing violence in the name of America or in the name of the states. And so that's a really modern idea. Now, admittedly, you can find religions, of course, take the teachings of Mahavira and the Jain tradition in India, who have this very staunch commitment to nonviolence, but the Jains also never had the responsibility of maintaining a state. They didn't, right? They're always a small minority community. And so you have the Hindu kings or Buddhist kings, Ashoka still utilized violence even after converting to Buddhism, and that's because he had to maintain his empire. So there is this kind of necessity of politics that requires some acknowledgement that sometimes violence may be necessary, but it's one option, right? So I think of nonviolence in the Islamic context as one option. And so one should always think about what is the best response? What is the best strategy? And Wahiduddin Khan talks about how violence is often driven by people acting before they think. They're not taking a moment to think about their course of action. It's impulsive. And so he talks about, you want to practice nonviolence, first thing is stop and think about what you're doing before you do it. Consider the consequences, right? And so that comes from that concept I described, this virtue of the Quran, which is sabr, having patience, right? Don't just act impulsively. Stop, think, and consider what is the best course of action. And I think in many cases, even when violence may be justified, of course, nonviolence is the better, ahsan, the better course of action. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Halverson. It's actually a good segue into my next question, because you mentioned the connection between the state and violence. And I have, again, another kind of slightly provocative question for all our panelists. And I'll translate as well that into Hindi. How effective is Islamic nonviolence to counter autocratic regimes whose support rests on the threat of violence? Is the example of a Badshah Khan or Maulana Azad viable in a country like Syria or Afghanistan? So in Hindi, I would say, क्या इस्लामिया हिंसा एक ऐसी सरकार जो हिंसा की बुनियाद पर खड़ी है उसके लिए फायदेमंद है? So the question again in English is, how effective is Islamic nonviolence to deal with states whose support rests on violence? And is the example of people like Badshah Khan effective or even realistic in a country like Syria or Afghanistan? So Faisal Bhai, I'd offer you your answer to this question to start off.
मुझे लगता है कि दुनिया की सबसे ताकतवर चीज नॉन वायलेंस इज ए पैकेज. नॉन वायलेंस एक पैकेज है जिसमें इंसानियत के लिए मोहब्बत, जिसमें रहम, जिसमें दया, जिसमें क्षमा, जिसमें माफ कर देना, सब चीज मिली हुई है. नॉन वायलेंस कोई मैं कहूँगा तो ये कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है कि हम खाली सेमिनार में डिस्कस करेंगे और ये हमारी समझ में आ जाएगी. ये एक वे ऑफ लाइफ है, लाइक सोशलिज्म. हाँ, तो मुझे लगता है कि दुनिया की सबसे ताकतवर चीज मोहब्बत है. और वो नॉन वायलेंस का पार्ट है, इंटीग्रल पार्ट है। दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी चीज इंसानियत पे रहम है। तो आप अगर कोई सही से प्रैक्टिस करे नॉन वायलेंस को अगर कोई सही से प्रैक्टिस करे तो सीरिया और अफगानिस्तान नहीं, पूरी दुनिया के जो ताकतवर लोग हैं हम उनसे लड़ाई लड़ सकते हैं, लेकिन वो नॉन वायलेंस सीखना पड़ेगा। वो नॉन वायलेंस प्रैक्टिकल गांधी ने सीखा था। आप ऐसा नहीं है कि नॉन वायलेंस पे मैंने 4 किताबें पढ़ ली और मैंने नॉन वायलेंस को जाके और मैं वहां पे काम करने लगूंगा। तो नॉन वायलेंस व्हेन आई वाज in my I will not mention the name. I was in the northeastern state of my country, my India, and there was a communal riot. I was with my team. There was a Balwant Yadav, Mr. Inamul Hassan, Afzal Bhai, and some other people. So I was organizing communal harmony prayers. I was distributing food. We were involved in distributing clothes, food. One morning एक सुबह हम लोग बाहर जा रहे थे, तो करीब 30 नौजवानों ने हमें घेर लिया और हमसे कहा हम तुम्हें मार डालेंगे। अब ये जो नए लोग थे सारे ये परेशान हो गए। मैंने उनसे एकदम डायलॉग शुरू कर दिया और मुझे भी लग रहा था कि आज मैं बचने वाला नहीं हूं, लेकिन मैं 10 मिनट के बाद वही लोग हमारे लिए ऑटो अरेंज कर रहे थे और हमसे कह रहे थे हमें वहां से बक्सा एक जगह है वहां जाना था। तो उन्होंने कहा कि वो हमारे लिए ऑटो अरेंज कर रहे थे। तो एवरी डे मैं देखता हूं कि नॉन वायलेंस, देखिए हथियारों से रक्षा नहीं हो सकती है दुनिया की। तो हाँ, अगर हमें वो प्रैक्टिस करना आता है तो मुझे तो इतना यकीन है नॉन वायलेंस और पीस और मोहब्बत में, लेकिन नॉन वायलेंस करने वाला मोहब्बत करने वाला भी होना चाहिए। केवल नॉन वायलेंस से काम नहीं चलेगा। तो मैंने जहां तक अपने काम के बीच में देखा है तो मुझे लगा है कि नॉन वायलेंस बहुत ताकतवर है और ये हमेशा दुनिया जितना जितना दुनिया सिविलाइज्ड होती चली जाएगी उतना उतना वो नॉन वायलेंस पे यकीन करती चली जाएगी। अगर हम नॉन वायलेंस पे यकीन नहीं कर रहे, इसका मतलब हम कहीं ना कहीं हमारे सिविलाइजेशन में, हमारी इंसानियत में कमी है। तो जैसे जैसे इंसानियत का लेवल बढ़ेगा वैसे वैसे नॉन वायलेंस, मैं रिलीजियस बहुत सी बातें नहीं कह रहा हूं बिकॉज आई एम नॉट ए फॉर्मल रिलीजियस स्कॉलर, लेकिन आप देखिए अभी धर्म के बारे में भी कैसी कैसी बातें आती चली जा रही है कि धर्म कितना लिबरल होता चला जा रहा है। तो मैं ये मानता हूं कि दुनिया की कहीं भी कोई भी ताकत है, अगर हम नॉन वायलेंस के तरीके से लड़ाई लड़ेंगे तो वो लड़ाई कामयाब नहीं होगी, बल्कि उस लड़ाई के बाद जो समाज बनेगा वो समाज भी बहुत डेमोक्रेटिक होगा, वो समाज भी पीसफुल होगा। तो एक फायदा ये है कि हम नॉन वायलेंस तरीके से लड़ाई लड़ेंगे, उसमें जो हमारा स्ट्रगल होगा उसमें बहुत फायदा है इंसानियत का, उसमें लोग बर्बाद नहीं होंगे, लोग जख्मी नहीं होंगे, और हम अपने मकसद की तरफ भी हम जो स्ट्रगल करना चाहते हैं तो वो जो है, आप देखिए आज से पहले एक ऑपरेशन में कितना खून बहता था। कोई डॉक्टर जब ऑपरेशन करता था तो उसका खून बहुत अभी कम खून में हो जाता है। तो हमें हमें नई नई तकनीक सीखना चाहिए, नॉन वायलेंस तरीके जो गांधी ने बताए थे। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत ताकतवर चीज है और कोई भी जगह दुनिया में ऐसी नहीं है जहां ये चल ना सके और अपना असर दिखा ना सके।
शुक्रिया फैसल भाई। डॉक्टर आजम हमारे लिए जवाब दे दीजिए।
शुक्रिया फैसल भाई।
आई एम वेरी सॉरी कि आपको मेरा ट्रांसलेशन करना पड़ा।
Not a problem. It's a pleasure. Faisal bhai. It's a pleasure. I'm taking part in this. It's amazing. Thank you. So Faisal bhai says that non-violence is actually a package. It comes with the different components are kindness, forgiveness, love, etc. And it's just not discussed in seminars, right? This is not only to discuss seminars. You actually need to live. It's a way of life. So you live by the rules of non-violence. And we can only understand nonviolence when we practice it. So it's not that you read 2 books and you are proficient in nonviolence, you can go and talk about it. You actually have to live your life as per the rules. And he says if we practice it correctly, then not only Syria and Afghanistan, any of those issues can be resolved. But we need to learn the exact definition of nonviolence, what exactly it is. He also mentioned Inam al-Hassan, right, Faisal Bhai? And there were 2 other names you mentioned. आप म्यूट पे हैं, sorry. आप म्यूट पे हैं.
मैं बता रहा था कि मैं एक बार एक नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न स्टेट में हमारे इंडिया में था, तो कैसे हम लोग एक कम्युनल राइट के दौरान काम कर रहे थे, वो वाला
जी हाँ. So he narrates an incident that he went to northeastern part of India and there were communal rights happening at that time. So he and a couple of other people were walking in, all of a sudden almost 30 people surrounded them and they wanted to actually kill them. And even Faisal Bhai thought, that's it, this is the last day of my life. But he did not lose hope. And at the same time, he started communicating, he started talking to those people. And in a few minutes, those people actually helped them to get a cab or auto rickshaw for them. So he said there's a lot of power and there's a lot of strength if you deal situation in a non-violent way. So that's exactly what happened, Faisal Bhai, right? And he also mentioned that that you can fight through non-violence, and the community or the nation that is built after that fight is actually more productive. But if you fight in a violent way, what the result is kind of not as good as if you fight through non-violence. And he also
एक बात मैं और कहूंगा कि एक नॉन वायलेंट सत्याग्रही, जिसे गांधी सत्याग्रही कहते थे, उसको इंसानियत से इतना प्यार होना चाहिए तब वो कहे कि यस आई एम रेडी फॉर, जैसे एक डॉक्टर होता है वो बिना MBBS कंप्लीट और हाउस जॉब के मैदान में नहीं जाता है, जितना एक माँ को बच्चे से प्यार होता है. तो अगर हम कहें कि मोहब्बत दुनिया में गैर अहम है या उसकी कोई अहमियत नहीं है, तो इसी तरह है जिस तरह एक माँ अपने बच्चे से प्यार करती है, उतना प्यार गांधी कहते थे कि एक सत्याग्रही को अपने लोगों से होना चाहिए, तब वो सही माने में नॉन वायलेंस प्रैक्टिस करेगा. ये सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है कि वो किसी MSW का कोर्स करके आई एम एन मास्टर इन सोशल वर्क. गांधी वाज नॉट मास्टर इन सोशल वर्क, मदर टेरेसा वाज नॉट मास्टर इन सोशल वर्क. तो ये एक जज्बा है इंसानियत के लिए जो अगर आप में है तभी आप एलिजिबल हैं फॉर आप नॉन वायलेंट को प्रैक्टिस करने के लिए. ये मुझे ऐसा लगता है. बाकी जो लोग और बात कहेंगे वो भी अपनी बात कहेंगे.
जी Faisal Bhai. So I guess you understood some part of it. He says love is a very integral component of non-violence. Without love, you cannot practice non-violence. For example, love of a mother towards her child, love of a leader towards the people. That's the integral part of non-violence. And if you go and study non-violence or get a degree in non-violence, that's not enough. That's not how you practice non-violence. And he gave a really good example. I like it because I'm from the medical side. He said that new surgical methods have been developed where the bloodshed or blood loss is way too less or low and as compared to what was in the past. So things could be dealt with or could be resolved without violence. It's good to, it's easier to practice non-violence and resolve an issue with less bloodshed. I hope I was able to convey it properly, Faisal Bhai.
Thank you, Dr. Azam. Thank you, Faisal Bhai. Dr. Ninowy, please.
Okay. Like my colleague mentioned earlier, that Islamic nonviolence does not mean pacifism or inactivism. It's exactly the opposite. It doesn't mean surrendering to the status quo and to violence. Al-Quran al-Karim, the entire book of Al-Quran is resistance from the beginning till the end. Resistance against religious tyranny, against social tyranny, against economic tyranny, and against political tyranny as well. Yet the Quranic resistance is positive in the sense that it aims for Islah, as the Quran uses that term, which is positive contribution. It does not aim for destruction to do reconstruction again. It doesn't aim to kill so it gives life again. There is no revenge in Islam. Revenge is not an Islamic value. It's a pre-Islamic value, let's say, that was there. It does not meet violence with violence. Yet it asks for justice. But after justice, as in Surah Nahl, ayah number 90, the Quran encourages the believers to actually go to the higher level than simply seeking justice. Justice is important so that societies are governed, so that assets are protected, honor, dignity, wealth, blood, etc. But also the Quran goes further. In Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. So you know what? Justice is important, and that's the basis of society, but you're asked to go to the higher. And therefore, destruction is not a way for construction. The Islam asked people, those who believe in it, obviously, to actually be part of that, if you want to call it resistance. I don't like to call it revolution, because revolution usually is more chaotic, and chaos is its objective oftentimes. I like to call it renaissance in the Arabic language, thawra versus nahda. Nahda is a renaissance. So the resistance, the Quranic resistance, aims at a renaissance, a better world for all, not simply a revolution that puts someone up, down, and someone down, up. That's not the issue here. And therefore, confounding political revolutions with religious issues oftentimes is what I think the examples that were called on in Afghanistan and Syria here, for example. Obviously, when we look at the prophetic example, we see that the Prophet ﷺ started with the society, grassroots level, in a spiritual, if you want to say, religious / spiritual reform. And then when that has gained some track, then he went into social reform, then economic reform, then he went on to political reform. He did not start immediately with political reform without neglecting it. Sure, does that work? It works sometimes. It doesn't work other times. Simply the notion of the knee-jerk sort of reaction that we resort to, an eye for an eye, and obviously an eye for an eye, while it ensures justice, it makes the whole world blind eventually if we practice it. And the Quran does not really, while it wants us to ensure that an eye for an eye is there, but really does not want us to practice it as much, wants us to actually go beyond and actually do preventive stuff before and then forgive after if we can. Therefore, we see in Islamic history, let's say, episodes where, and again, when I say Islamic history, I really mean Muslim history. It's very important to distinguish between what Islam says and what Muslims do. There's always in every segment of society, those who are devout and those who are not, like I mentioned at the beginning. So it would be unjust, I think, to hold Islam for what some Muslims do and vice versa. And that doesn't mean that all Muslims do evil or all of them do good. It's just like the rest of human beings. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly everywhere. But throughout our Muslim history, we've had episodes of beautiful examples of nonviolence, and we've also, as a part of the human fabric, we've had episodes where there was violence. Sometimes religion or religious texts were used to substantiate it, and those religious texts, obviously, in my view, were out of contexts, and that's why they became a pretext. But obviously, people realized that the Creator who sent faith systems to guide people to Him did not necessarily ask those people to take the law in their own hands and kill or take the lives away of people. Again, I think the construction is positive contribution, is building and avoiding violence at almost any rate, as Islam says it. When we talk about the preservation and the protection of the property and nafs and honor and blood and all that, violence comes the last thing, meaning, is there a justified violence? Because that was the question that was also talked about. Islam again puts it in the story of the two children of Adam. If he extends his hand to kill you, do not extend your hand to kill him. Yet defend yourself from being killed, meaning you defend yourself without the intention, with no intention to kill the other, but the intention to protect yourself. I think I want to make that clear from my point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Ninowy. Very passionate answer as well. Dr. Halverson, please.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question about the utility of nonviolence as a strategy in the context of opposing a regime like the Assad regime in Syria, or the new Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So as I think about nonviolence as a broader concept, the limit that I often encounter as I think about it is when we come to an issue like genocide. Then in my view, nonviolent resistance doesn't work against a regime which is intent on genocide. Nonviolence is effective as a strategy against a regime that wants to subdue you, wants to rule over you, right? They don't want to eliminate your existence from the planet. If they want to eliminate your existence from the planet, in my view, nonviolence is not an effective tactic. But if you're trying to oppose an unjust regime that wants to control you and wants to subdue you, then it is an effective strategy. So in the case of Syria, and when the Arab Spring unfolded, there was nonviolent resistance. The teachings of Shaykh Dr. Said inspired groups like the Duraya Youth, who opposed the Assad regime. The problem was that other groups were not committed to nonviolence, and they engaged in guerrilla warfare, and essentially the resistance to the regime just spilled out into all-out war. Now, when we think about the effectiveness of nonviolence, people are sometimes taken aback by the fact that nonviolent activists will die. Right? When you oppose a tyrannical regime, an oppressive regime, yeah, you will die. Lives will be lost when engaging in nonviolence. The difference is, though, if you have a nonviolent resistance against, for example, the Assad regime, maybe 10,000 people are killed, right? And that's terrible. That's a terrible number. But if you're engaging in war, you have 500,000 dying, right? And the total decimation of infrastructure and agriculture. So nonviolent resistance is not without loss of life. Going back to the Prophet's life, when he was still in Mecca, some of his followers were killed. Sumaya was the first Shahid, the first martyr of Islam, and this was the time when the Muslims were not fighting, right? She was killed simply for her beliefs. This is the mother of Ammar. And, the Muslims did not respond with violence towards them, right? We see violence implemented once we have the Muslims established in Medina and the responsibilities of the state. So I think that nonviolence in this day and age is actually more effective than ever before. And I say that because of things like the power of the cell phone, right? That you can video things, that you can bring attention to injustices like never before, because nonviolence is way more effective when people see your resistance, the nonviolence. They see the injustice of the persecution. They see, when we see footage, for example, of the American civil rights struggle, and we see Dr. King marching across that bridge nonviolently, and we see the brutality of the police and the white supremacist regime that was opposing them, those images are powerful and they bring support from the world. If those things are happening in secret, in isolation, it's not as powerful, because then you're dependent purely on trying to reach the conscience of the oppressor, right? You're trying to move and transform them, that they think it's not worth it to continue to oppress you. But if you bring in this outside pressure, the condemnation, the recognition from other people through the use of multimedia, through the power of the cell phone, through the internet and so forth, it's far more effective. So in the context of Syria, I think that nonviolence could have been a successful resistance, but ultimately the fact that the movement was small compared to the various violent groups who came to dominate the conflict, have left us with the situation that we're still in today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Halverson. I know we're kind of approaching now the open Q&A, and I did have one last question though to offer our panelists, and maybe if you could kindly maybe have a bit of a briefer answer, because I know there's a lot of probably burning questions now the audience want to ask all of you, but trying to bring it back to Mahatma Gandhi is probably my last question for all you. So there is a misperception by some people that Islam is only about itself. It's self-referential and not open to outside influences, particular from other religions. And I was going to ask you this question. What can contemporary Muslims and other religious communities or other philosophical communities learn from Mahatma Gandhi's approach to interreligious understanding, respect, as well as that of his key Muslim followers? Or restated, what can today's Muslims and other people learn from Mahatma Gandhi about giving respect and understanding to other religions? So in Hindi, I'm sure Faisal Bhai, you understand my question, but I'll translate it anyways. आजकल के मुसलमान और दूसरे समाज के लोग भी महात्मा गांधी से सभी धर्मों को समझने और इज्जत करने के बारे में क्या सीख सकते हैं? So I offer that as my last question to the panelists. And Faisal Bhai, please start us off.
देखिए, ये बहुत आसान बात है. मैं आपसे कह रहा हूँ, मैं फिर से वही कहूँगा कि कुरान शरीफ में और हदीस में इसका बहुत मटेरियल है कि हमें दूसरे, इसको गांधी जी कहते थे सर्वधर्म समभाव. गांधी जी की लैंग्वेज में दिस इज सर्वधर्म, और उनके जो 10 व्रत हैं उनमें भी है सर्वधर्म समानस्य, यानी सभी धर्मों को बराबर रिस्पेक्ट देना. अगर आप मुझसे पूछेंगे तो कुरान शरीफ में और हदीस में बहुत सी चीजें इसकी, अब देखिए, हम अगर एक मुसलमान बनते हैं तो हम क्या कहते हैं? आमन व कुतुबिही व रुसुलिही, हम सारी किताबों पर ईमान लाए, हम सारे रसूलों पर ईमान लाए. लेकिन अल्लाह ताला कह रहे हैं हमने हर कौम में पैगंबर भेजे, संभालने वाले भेजे. तो ये बात, ये देखिए, आपके कल्चर की बात तो हो सकती है कि आप दूसरे को रिस्पेक्ट ना दें. अल्लाह ताला ने कहीं आपको दूसरे को रिस्पेक्ट देने से नहीं रोका है. ये आपका ट्राइबल मेंटालिटी हो सकती है, या आपका कल्चर हो सकता है, या आपका बैकग्राउंड हो सकता है, और आप उसको इस्लाम का कहें कि हम दूसरे धर्म को इज्जत इसलिए नहीं देते हैं कि ये इस्लाम हमें इससे रोकता है. अरे, इस्लाम तो इसको कहता है कि हमें दूसरे धर्म को इज्जत देनी चाहिए, दूसरे धर्म को प्यार देना चाहिए. मैं अक्सर जब मैं अपने सबका घर, दिस इज माई सबका घर है हमारा, हाउस फॉर ऑल, तो वहां जो आते हैं मैं उनसे कहलवाता हूँ हम रब के हैं, रब सब के हैं, इसलिए सब हमारे हैं. मैं जब मुसलमानों में जाता हूँ तो पूछता हूँ, अच्छा हिंदू भाइयों को किसने बनाया है? जापान ने बनाया है या ईरान ने बनाया है? कहते नहीं, अल्लाह ताला ने बनाया है. अल खल्क़ु कुल्लुहुम या अल्लाह. अगर मैं ये समझता हूं कि इस इंसानियत को अल्लाह ताला ने बनाया है तो मैं उससे डिसरिस्पेक्ट कर ही नहीं सकता. आप बताइए, मैं मुसलमान हूं, मैं ये मानता हूं अल खल्क़ु कुल्लुहुम या अल्लाह, तो मैं कैसे किसी हिंदू से, किसी सिख से, किसी ईसाई से, जैसे ही मैं उसको डिसरिस्पेक्ट करूंगा मेरा अल्लाह ताला से कनेक्शन टूट जाएगा. मैं अल्लाह ताला से अपना कनेक्शन नहीं तोड़ना चाहता हूं, तो मेरी मजबूरी है. हाँ, मुझे, मेरा मन है, मैं बहुत अहंकारी हूं, मैं प्राउडी हूं, लेकिन फिर भी अगर मैं मुसलमान हूं तो मुझे दूसरे धर्म को सम्मान और प्यार देना पड़ेगा. प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की जिंदगी में, खुलफाए राशिदीन में, सूफिया इकराम में हर जगह मिलता है कि किसी ने पूछा कि बाबा फरीद गंज शकर was a great Sufi sant of चिश्ती सिलसिला. किसी ने पूछा कि बाबा फरीद के की खानकाह में क्या स्पेशल चीज थी, तो उन्होंने कहा हिंदू साधु संत बहुत आते थे, रोजाना आने वालों में बड़ी तादाद हिंदू साधु संतों की थी. आपको मालूम है सिखों की जो सबसे पवित्र उनकी जो धार्मिक किताब है गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब, उसमें बाबा फरीद की शायरी है, बाबा फरीद के दोहे हैं। तो ये बात कह देना कि बल्कि मुझे तो लगता है कि एक मुसलमान के लिए ज्यादा इजी है दूसरे को प्यार करना। अल खल्क़ु कुल्लुहुम मयाल अल्लाह, ला हदीस से मुसलसल, जो हमारे यहाँ मुसलसलात है, वो हदीस शुरू होती है अर्राहिमून यरहमुकुमुर रहमान, अल्लाह ताला रहीम है और उस रहम वाला है और उसको रहम पसंद है। तो ये बात मुझे कभी ऐसे लोग नहीं मिले, मैं चाहता हूं मुझे ऐसे लोग मिले, मैं उनसे मिलता हूं, मैं बात करता हूं कि एक मुसलमान अगर ये मानता है वत्तीन वज़ैतून वतूर सीनीन वहाज़ल बलदिल अमीन लक़द खलक़नल इंसान फी अहसन तक़वीम, अल्लाह ताला की बेस्ट क्रिएशन इंसान है, और मैं अगर इंसान से किसी बुनियाद पे उसकी रिस्पेक्ट नहीं कर रहा हूं, मजहब की बुनियाद पे, उसके जेंडर की बुनियाद पे, उसके रंग रूप की बुनियाद पे, तो मैं डायरेक्ट अल्लाह ताला को चैलेंज कर रहा हूं। आई एम चैलेंजिंग अल्लाह ताला। तो ये हमारा समझाने का तरीका नहीं होना चाहिए, थोड़ा अट्रैक्टिव हो। जब हम नौजवानों से बात कर रहे हैं तो हमें बिल्कुल क्लास के प्रोफेसर की थोड़ा मजाक, गांधी जी कहते थे मैं बहुत मजाकिया हूं, अगर मैं मजाकिया नहीं होता तो मैं सुसाइड कर लेता। तो सामाजिक काम करने वाले जो इंसानों के बीच काम कर रहे हैं उसको बहुत फ्लेक्सिबल, उसको बहुत जो थोड़ा अच्छे अखलाक वाला ये होना चाहिए। तो मैं आपकी ये बात, एक पक्का मुसलमान जब तक नहीं हो सकता जब तक वो दूसरे को रिस्पेक्ट ना करे। और आई एम नॉट ए रिलीजियस स्कॉलर, लेकिन फिर भी मैं इसको कुरान हदीस से साबित कर देता हूं कि जो दूसरे के धर्म या दूसरे इंसान की धर्म के बुनियाद पे रिस्पेक्ट नहीं कर रहा है, वो अल्लाह ताला को चैलेंज कर रहा है, और ही इज नॉट ए रियल, वो सच्चाई के साथ ईमान वाला नहीं हो सकता। मेरा मानना ऐसा है, बाकी हमारे और साथी है, लेकिन मैं ये मानता हूं। और ये गांधी जी के इस संभाव का इस्लाम में कोई टकराव मुझे नहीं दिखता है। बल्कि आपको पता है कि गांधी जी के यहाँ खान अब्दुल गफ्फार जब साबरमती आश्रम में रहते थे तो वो कुरान पढ़ते थे और वो गीता पढ़ते थे। तो इस तरह का मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि हम ये धर्म की, दूसरे के धर्म, या गांधी जी का जो एक उसूल था सब धर्मों को समान इज्जत देने का, ये एक मुसलमान के लिए प्रैक्टिकल है। उसके इस्लाम पक्का मुसलमान होने में इसमें कोई दिक्कत आपस में नहीं है। सॉरी मैं आपका ज्यादा टाइम ले लेता हूँ।
शुक्रिया फैसल भाई। डॉक्टर आजम हमारे लिए अंग्रेजी में उनका जवाब दे दीजिए।
Sure, I'll try to be brief. According to Faisal Bhai, it's easy. Actually, it's easy to answer that question because at many places, Quran Sharif and Hadith has narrated that we need to respect, and we have to respect everyone else, not just Muslims. And the message of Quran Sharif and the message of Hadith actually aligns with Sarva Dharm Samanase. That's what it is, Faisal Bhai. Yeah, and which is respect for all.
समभाव, सर्व धर्म समभाव, सभी मजहबों के लिए इज्जत का जज्बा, बराबरी का जज्बा.
Yes, the respect for all. And we believe in all prophets, and we believe that Allah has sent prophets to different places and not just one section of the world. So, and Allah has not stopped us from respecting others. If somebody says, I'm Muslim, I only respect Islam and not other religions, then that is not the message of Islam. It's actually contradicting Allah's message. So, and then Faisal Bhai says, we belong to God, and God is for everyone, so everyone is for us. That's exactly what he said. And God has created others, so it's if you disrespect others, then actually you're disrespecting God. And he also mentioned that it's good to incorporate a bit of humor, like the element of humor to actually get your message across for the youth of today's world. And Gandhiji used to do that too. He was funny and he had a sense of humor that would actually make things easier and comfortable for everyone. And Faisal Bhai says, if anybody disrespects or discriminates other people based on their race, religion, and color, then we are actually challenging Allah and not following his correct message. And Faisal Bhai also thinks that there's no contradiction between Gandhiji's message and, of course, what Islam teaches us. So the teachings of Islam aligns with Gandhiji's message entirely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azam. And there was a reference to Baba Farid, who's a famous Sufi saint, and maybe that's a good crosswalk to Dr. Ninowy, perhaps, for your answer.
Bismillah. Very nice. I love Baba Farid. Look, wisdom is ancient inheritance of humanity. The Lord gives wisdom, and it's owned by humanity. I think what we can learn from Mahatma Gandhi or Gandhiji is the courage to stand against the current there and actually stand for nonviolence. Gandhiji argued that a person who believes in truth and God cannot go to a place of worship one day and the next day foster hate and violence. And that's really at the crux of the matter here. We cannot erect walls of hate under the banner of mercy. And I'm not talking here about the Muslim community. I'm talking generally about humanity. From a Muslim community, I mean, the Quran was very explicit. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, which means we've afforded all human beings dignity, honor, and worth. So, I mean, it goes beyond that. Obviously, you all know from an Islamic perspective, the prophetic narrative tells us that we may be one color, we may be different colors, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different cultures. But at the end of the day, we are one people. But I think what we can learn from Mahatma Gandhi and Gandhiji here specifically, and that's what's important here, is to actually have that courage, to rekindle that light, that, all right, the call is to a higher call. And the call is to actually stand up for what is right. And what is right is definitely nonviolence. And violence is definitely not right. There is no justification for one soul to be killed, in my view. And there, regardless of the of what its theology or what its background or what its what the religion of that person was or so. In that sense, I think it's important to sort of look at the Gandhi example and see, all right, hey, it's the truth is not always convenient. The political winds do not sail always with the truth. And also, like my colleague mentioned, remaining on the nonviolent side is costly. It's costly in all kinds of ways, up to obviously to the murder that happened to Gandhiji eventually. But even before that, it's costly on the reputation, it's costly on the worldly gains, it's costly. And but that's what it is. I think that's what's important here is what the prophets have done is they've done their absolute best. And I think that's what we're compelled to do.
Thank you, Dr. Ninowy. And Dr. Halverson.
Yeah, so regarding the reception of Mahatma Gandhi's teachings and methods within the Muslim community, unfortunately, there is this tendency that has existed in various segments of the Muslim community, the Ummah, that will sort of naturally shun anything that is non-Muslim, right? With this fear that, taking the ideas from someone like Mahatma Gandhi, who was a Hindu, would be like introducing Jahili ideas or Bid'ah into the religion. But this attitude isn't well grounded in the example of the Prophet, because what we're talking about is knowledge. What we're talking about is a method, a technique. We're not talking about incorporating these religious ideas, but a body of knowledge. And of course, there's a famous hadith in which the Prophet says, seek knowledge, even if it's in China, right? And China, this is not a Muslim land when the Prophet was saying this, nor is it now, of course. But it's very unfortunate that there is this attitude among some who would resist what Gandhi has to offer everyone because of the fact that he's coming from outside of the Muslim community. And so it may well be that in order for Gandhi's methods, his techniques to really resonate in Muslim communities, it needs to come through someone like the story about Shaykh Khan, right? That it needs to come through a Muslim representative in order for it to be accepted. You know, so whether it's Shaykh Khan or it's Jaldat Saeed, who are making the case in the Quran and in the Hadith in order to say, look, this is in complete harmony with what we're talking about here, right? This is part of Islam. This is completely legitimate. And so I think that is necessary for the wider reception of what Mahatma Gandhi has offered us, is for these Muslim voices to be the ones who are really representing and communicating those ideas to the wider community.
Thank you, Dr. Halverson, and thank you to our three panelists for answering my pre-scripted, but a little bit provocative questions. And all your answers were, like I said, great food for thought. I've eaten into our open Q&A. I'm sure there's a lineup of questions now that people would like to ask you. So thank you, Dr. Azam, as well, for your translation services. Very much appreciated. I'll segue now to Dr. Heather Eaton, who is a director on the board of the MGPC, who will now kind of select one or two questions. And I hope people online don't mind if we go a little bit past noon, just in case there's a lot of kind of food for kind of consideration and answers there. So Heather, can I segue to you now?
Yes, thank you. I'm ready. Thank you to all our panelists. Very interesting and different kinds of comments. I'm going to summarize a couple of comments. So there were the first sets of comments that came in were mainly about whether religion is inherently violent, are humans inherently violent. A gendered question came in saying, is violence more concentrated in male responses than women responses? So they were not questions, they were comments, but they were raising these issues. And now I'm going to combine several questions and hopefully just come up with three. One is, what has happened to the conversation on negative violence? So what we would in other circles call structural violence. So it was mentioned social injustices, gender injustices, the treatment of animals. So what has happened to Gandhi's constructive program against negative, so what Galton calls negative peace? So that's one set of comments about what about social injustices and nonviolence. I'm going to ask the second question. And again, these are two comments. So I'm just going to get it exactly. What's the relevance of Sufism or Islamic mysticism in repelling rising hatred and Islamophobia, especially in the Western world? So that I'm going to pair that question with a question about if Islam is got some inherent nonviolent themes, how does the current understanding of jihad as violent, how has that developed? How has that taken root in different parts of the world? So those are two sets of questions. One is on social injustice and systemic violence, gender, race, animals. And then the second one is about the notion of jihad that has violent tendencies, and are there options of in the Sufi traditions or Islamic mysticism that could counter that? So Rahil, I'm going to go back to you to say, I'm not sure who should answer these because they're not directed. They're simply questions.
We can mix up and maybe start with Dr. Halverson and close off with Faisal Bhai. at the end. We'll do a reverse rotation. If Dr. Halverson, I can put you on the spot to answer 3 difficult questions.
You want me to take all those questions?
No,
I
think
pick
you
and choose.
can pick. You can pick what you would like to respond to.
Wow, lots to say, lots of different topics here. Well, so let me revisit the concept of jihad, because I talked about this a bit in my opening remarks. It sounded to me like the person who asked the question maybe thought that we were saying, or maybe that I was saying, that jihad is originally nonviolent and then it became violent later on, and that is not my argument whatsoever. Jihad is this broad concept referring to all types of struggles and efforts that apply to all aspects of your life. You know, it could be something like the struggle to get out of bed at dawn and perform wudu to pray Fajr, right? Instead of sleeping in, right? That's like a minimal example, but it requires effort on your part to complete the prayer. And so when we look at the way the Quran uses the word jihad, when we look at the Hadith, what we find is the application of this concept in all these different contexts. So there is, for example, as I mentioned before, the jihad an-nafs, the struggle against one's inclination to sin and disobey God's commandments and so forth. But there's also jihad bil-sayf, jihad of the sword, and that has always existed, right? That has existed since the time of the Prophet. And so jihad bil-sayf isn't just open war or harb, right? It's a type of struggle through force of arms that falls under certain rules and regulations, right? It's not that anything goes, right? There are wars that Muslims fight in, and that's a war. And then there's something else, which is jihad bil-sayf. And so we find, you know, these rules and regulations regarding what we would refer to as a just war and the proper conduct of war. So when we look at the activities of groups like the Taliban or ISIS or Al-Qaeda, they refer to their struggles as jihad bil-sayf. But they're aware that their tactics and their behaviors are, whether or not they fall within the category is highly debatable, because I've analyzed their statements, and you can read like the writings of Bin Laden. He's consciously trying to preemptively defend his tactics against like obvious points of, wait a minute, can you do that? For example, the practice of suicide bombing. I mean, suicide is forbidden. This is explicit in the Hadith. It's very clear, as well as things like not killing non-combatants. But what these violent groups do is they're aware of those things. They're just finding ways around it. So, for example, people who defend suicide bombing will say it's not actually suicide, because the intention of the bomber is not to kill themselves out of despair, it's to attack the enemy. They're just dying in the process, right? They're finding all these ways kind of around what would otherwise seem quite clear. So that's what I have to say about jihad. Now, I'll just touch on one more of these, about the relevancy of tasawwuf or Sufism. You know, I think we have this conception of Sufism as being completely devoid of political interests, right? That Sufism, because it is the inner dimension of Islam and something that focuses on inner experience of God and the cultivation of certain virtues, that we think that it's not interested in the world. And that's not the case. There are numerous examples of Sufis who were engaged in political matters. Take, for example, the resistance to Russian rule in the Caucasus, in places like Dagestan and Chechnya. You know, we have great Sufi warriors like Imam Shamil, who fought against Russian rule. And so it would be a mistake, I think, to imagine that Sufism is inherently sort of this nonviolent form of Islam. I don't think that's correct. But certainly, because Sufism does place this emphasis on inner virtue, the purification of the heart, the development of virtues like love and kindness, as Mr. Faisal was discussing, those things are of course integral to the nonviolence. And so there's, I think, a receptive audience within the Sufi community that other groups who are disinterested in the cultivation of certain virtues, maybe. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Dr. Ninowy, maybe we can segue to you and then afterwards to Faisal Bhai.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think it's been mentioned, but again, let me mention it again, that jihad, like my colleague mentioned, has many meanings in the Arabic language. Al-qital, which is fighting now, to mean jihad, that's a highly specific application. That came only in 10 verses out of 6,236 Quranic verses that are mostly talking about mercy and love and compassion. And even these 10 verses that have talked about qital, which is the fighting, has nothing to do with aggression. Al-Quran al-Karim forbids aggression explicitly. لا تعتدوا. Do not transgress. Inna Allah la yuhibbul mu'tadin. Allah does not like those, does not love those who transgress. But they're all in a simple situation where it's the last minute absolute self-defense from imminent threat of being killed. And that is the eye for an eye, basic, that's there. Though the hadith actually says if I have a choice to be the killer or the killed, which one? The hadith says be the killed, and the hadith is authenticated by Ibn Hajar rather than being the killer. All right, but the point here is these 10 verses that actually talked about jihad in the context of actually fighting, and jihad is not limited to that, talked about in qatalukum qatiluhum. If they fight you and they're trying to kill you, absolutely kill you, then you are not allowed, or you should not simply let them just kill you. You should defend yourself, honor and property. That's the basic idea here that the Quran mentions, and then immediately mentions in janahu lis-salmi fajnah laha. Once peace or once non-violence becomes a choice, immediately take that choice. So there you go. الضرورة تقدر بقدرها, like Usul, like legal theorists mentioned. Necessity is measured exactly by how absolutely necessary it is. And in that sense, if the limitations are extreme, but again, the confounding of politics with religion oftentimes takes precedent. Not every jihad is a fighting, and not every fighting is jihad, in my view. Obviously, not only in my view, that's a standard Muslim view, standard theological view. Definitely, jihad does not mean transgressing against other people, and that's that's explained. The fighting against other people was for the absolute last-minute protection of self and honor. As far as I think the other question, real quick, that was mentioned. Maybe I should mention this also. Jihad today is extremely needed, specifically in a world today that is subjugated to verbal violence and physical violence, and even violence on the level of a thought. And jihad struggle needs to actually be taken against that. And I don't mean here obviously violent struggle, but I mean the jihad that the Quran told us, putting a lot of non-violent jihad to actually struggle to bring back hope against all this violence that's being portrayed. As far as Sufism, look, Sufism has many schools and many different ways, and there's not one thing that explains Sufism entirely. In general, like my colleague mentioned, yes, Sufis look towards the sanctity of life, all life, including plants, including non-living objects. They're all living, sentient world, and also love and compassion and all that. Again, in general, the Sufism has not necessarily been allowed to maybe grow in general circles lately. simply because of inner Islamic dimensions that have changed, or they've maybe for excess of what Sufis have gone to the point that you'll find Sufis who say, well, we're not Muslims, we're just Sufis. And obviously that irritates the others who say, well, if it's Sufism Islam, then why aren't they Muslims? Anyway, to make the long story short, I think Sufis have always existed. Their method was pretty much non-violent across the board. Obviously, there are situations when, like it was mentioned, when an absolute necessity is there, for example, just to save oneself from being killed or slaughtered. Other than that, I think Sufis Sufis need to actually revive their basics from my point of view, and become more aligned with the texts as well, and less with just stories. The text has plenty to offer, and also to grow, offering that love and non-violence that they've always done.
Thank you, Dr. Ninowy. And last but not least, Faisal Bhai.
You want me to
Dr. Azam will translate as well, for sure.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, मैं उर्दू में पूछ लेती हूँ फैसल भाई से। बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस आए थे, मगर ये दोनों क्वेश्चन जो डॉक्टर हैदर ईडन ने पिक किया है और सबको कंबाइन करके, पहला क्वेश्चन आप दोनों का जवाब दे सकते हैं या एक का जवाब दे सकते हैं। पहला क्वेश्चन सोशल इनजस्टिस पे है। तो सब लोग गवर्नमेंटल नॉन वायलेंस की बात करते हैं बड़े स्केल पे, मगर उसके बारे में आपका ख्याल है जो समाजी नाइंसाफी है, जैसे कि जानवरों के खिलाफ, राइट, मर्द औरत के बीच, या और भी तरह की जो छोटे छोटे हर जगह समाजी नाइंसाफी की बातें। और दूसरा क्वेश्चन एक्चुअली जिहाद पे है। तो जिहाद का क्या माने है इस्लाम में, और क्या सूफिज्म या कोई ऐसा जुज या ऐसा पार्ट है इस्लाम का हिस्सा जो उसके खिलाफ है, या किस तरह से जिहाद को आप एक्सप्लेन करेंगे? तो दो क्वेश्चन हैं
जी। मैं दूसरे क्वेश्चन के बारे में जिहाद के हमारे डॉक्टर जो जेफरी और शेख याहिया ने बहुत अच्छे से बता दिया। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बात बिल्कुल सही है कि कोई भी समाज हो, उसको विद इन अपने आप में भी सोशल जस्टिस की बात, और हमने बहुत अच्छा एक एक्सपीरियंस, एक तजुर्बा किया है कि हमने धर्म की ताकत को, गांधी ने कहा था मैं धर्म की ताकत को सामाजिक न्याय की तरफ मोड़ना चाहता हूँ। देयर इज हमारे इंडिया में दिल्ली के पास एक रीजन है जहाँ पे राइट टू फूड के लिए कुछ लोग काम कर रहे थे, और वो पिछले 5 साल से काम कर रहे थे और उनको कोई कामयाबी नहीं मिलती थी। तो एक दिन उन्होंने मुझसे कहा कि आप भी आइए, और तो मैं गया तो वहां करीब 50 मुस्लिम नौजवान थे। तो मैंने उनको, अब वो बेचारे वहां जाके राइट टू फूड है, उसका ये नेचर है, ये उसकी हिस्ट्री है। मैंने सिर्फ 5 मिनट बात की। मैंने कहा प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम कहते हैं वल्लाहु ला युमिन, वल्लाहु ला, जो वो ईमान वाला नहीं है जो भूखों की रोटी का इंतजाम न करे। इतनी देर में दे ऑल वर रेडी टू वर्क फॉर राइट टू फूड। तो ये हमें बहुत जरूरी है कि हमें हमारे ये जो एनिमल की बात थी, हमें समाज के प्रति सेंसिटिव होना चाहिए। ये हम असल में, मैं मानता हूँ रिलीजन इज फॉर मेकअप, लाइक ब्यूटी पार्लर। अगर आपको खूबसूरत बनना है, धर्म का बुनियादी काम ही ये है। रिलीजन शुड टॉक अबाउट फूड, religion should talk about safe drinking water, religion should talk about gender justice. If we are not taking about, आप महिलाओं को देखिए, अल्लाह ताला ने तो औरतों को सब हक दिए हैं। दो औरतों की भी 2 आंख हैं, 2 कान हैं, लेकिन इंसानों ने उसको कम किया है। तो ये बहुत जरूरी है, और हम खुदाई खिदमतगार में हम इसको बहुत इसको सीखते हैं कि कैसे हम धर्म का मसला ही मोड़ दें। मैं आपको कहूंगा कि मैंने अब तक 30 साल में, 25 साल में लाखों नौजवानों से मिला हूं, मुस्लिम नौजवानों से भी, बाकी और नौजवानों से। किसी ने मुझसे जिहाद के बारे में नहीं पूछा। हर एक कहता है वो मोहब्बत चाहता है, वो कुछ काम करना चाहता है, वो क्रिएटिव बनना चाहता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये जो बातें कही हैं वो बिल्कुल सही हैं। और धर्म, जहां तक जो मैं समझा, जो मुझे लग रहा है कि समाज को अपने आप में भी, कोई भी समाज हो दुनिया का, उसको अपने बारे में भी उसको न्याय के प्रति समर्पित होना चाहिए। किसी ने मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम से पूछा कि इस्लाम से आप चाहते क्या हो, क्या चाहते हो इस्लाम से? तो आपने कहा कि सनाए यमन से एक औरत चलेगी अकेली और मक्के तक आएगी, कोई आंख उसको उठाए, उस पर उठेगी नहीं और कोई हाथ उसको टच नहीं करेगा, ऐसा न्याय चाहता हूं मैं। यानी यमन से एक औरत तन्हा नौजवान जेवरात के साथ अपने पैसे के साथ चलेगी और मक्का तक आएगी, लेकिन कोई आंख उसकी तरफ नहीं उठेगी गलत, और कोई हाथ उसकी तरफ नहीं जाएगा गलत, ऐसा न्याय चाहता हूं। अद्दीन व नसीहा, प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने कहा अद्दीन व नसीहा, दीन खैर ख्वाही का नाम। इफ फैसल खान इज वेल, अगर मैं वेल विशर हूं अदर्स के लिए, यही दीन है। तो ये समाज को खुद भी सेंसिटिव होना चाहिए, और खास तौर से जेंडर जस्टिस वाला मुद्दा जो है, एनिमल राइट्स हैं, ये तो आप जैसे जैसे समाज अपने आप में समझदार होगा और वो सही, और हमारे रिलीजियस स्कॉलर को भी चाहिए कि गैर जरूरी मुद्दों को छोड़ के जो जरूरी चीजें हैं उनको बॉय। राइट टू फूड इज ए रिलीजियस टॉपिक। लोगों को रहने का अधिकार, लोगों के आप देखिए जितने भी ये बुनियादी हैं, चाइल्ड राइट्स की बात हो, ये सबको भी हमें धर्म की तरफ पे बताना चाहिए। प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने वेडनेसडे तय कर दिया था कि इस दिन सिर्फ औरतों के मसाइल में सुनूंगा। हम लोग विमेन राइट्स डे मनाते हैं साल में एक बार 8 मार्च को। प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम was celebrating women's right day on every Wednesday. उन्होंने कह दिया था बुधवार में, वेडनेसडे में मैं सिर्फ औरतों के मसाइल सुनूंगा। At the time of Prophet, there was a women rights day on every week, on every Wednesday. तो हमें धर्म का जो समाजी पहलू है उसको उजागर करना चाहिए, उसके बारे में बात करनी चाहिए, उसके बारे में डिस्कस करना चाहिए। पीने का पानी, प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने कहा कि अगर मुझे नबूवत के काम से छुट्टी मिलेगी तो मैं लोगों को पानी पिलाने का काम करूंगा। कितनी दुनिया में आज सेफ ड्रिंकिंग वाटर की जरूरत है। प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद ने कहा कि अगर मुझे टाइम मिले नबूवत के काम से तो मैं लोगों को पानी पिलाने का काम करूंगा। प्रॉफिट मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने फरमाया अबाउट प्लांटेशन कि अगर तुम देखो कि कयामत आ रही है और तुम्हारे हाथ में एक छोटा सा दरख्त है तो यू शुड प्लांट। ये मत समझो कि अब कयामत आ गई, अब क्या होगा और ये अब तो खत्म हो जाएगा, नहीं, उसको प्लांट करो, उसको लगा दो। तो धर्म के जो सोशल चीजें हैं हम लोग उसको बोलते नहीं है, हम उसको तस्किरा नहीं करते। ये बहुत चीजें, और वो चीजें मैं तो ढूंढता हूं तो मुझे हजारों चीजें मिलती। देयर इज ए सूरा इन कुरान, उसका नाम है चींटी। या अय्युहन नमल दखलु मसाकिना, उसमें बताया कि चींटी की जान बचाना भी कितना जरूरी है। तो अगर हम उस ध्यान से देखेंगे, फिर वहीं पे बात आ जाती है कि अगर हम इंसानों से प्यार करेंगे तो हम सब चीजें इंसानियत के पक्ष में करेंगे। आज जो कैपिटलिस्ट दुनिया को डिस्ट्रॉय कर रहे हैं, दे आर नॉट डूइंग ऑन द नेम ऑफ रिलीजन। सेम लाइक कम्युनलिस्ट एंड कैपिटलिस्ट बोथ आर सेम। वो लोग जो दुनिया को खराब कर रहे हैं वो तो सिर्फ प्रॉफिट मेकिंग के नाम पे कर रहे हैं, वो तो सिर्फ। तो इसलिए धर्म, हमें चाहिए कि मजहब को हम लोगों के फायदा पहुंचाने का जरिया बनाएं। Someone asked with, this is my last, someone asked with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, khairun nas, who is the best human being? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, man yanfa'an nas, जिससे लोगों को फायदा पहुंचे वो सबसे बढ़िया इंसान है। तो अब हम सोचें कि हम लोगों को फायदा पहुंचा रहे हैं या लोगों को नुकसान पहुंचा रहे हैं।
Okay, शुक्रिया फैसल भाई। You have a difficult task, Dr. Azam, to translate that quickly before we close off the proceedings. I'm sure people's stomachs are rumbling now. But thank you, Faisal bhai. There's a lot there for us to think about.
Thank you, Faisal bhai. I'm just going to say it in a few words. Actually, Faisal bhai has combined both the questions together and answered both together. And it's a great answer because it has both the components. He actually mentioned a few instances where in a nutshell, he says that religion should be made the means to serve people. And I mean, religious leaders should forget useless stuff that they're talking about, all the political things that are not directly related to one's everyday life. They should actually focus on important issues like water, like food, for the communities who are deprived, the communities who are deprived of it. And he mentioned that they've learned so much from working with the Khudai Khidmatgar organization. And the other thing he mentioned was Prophet Muhammad had assigned every Wednesday, I guess everybody understood that, every Wednesday as the Women's Day, because he would address women's issues every week. So we celebrate March 8th, which is once a year, but for Prophet Muhammad, it was very important. Somebody asked him, what does he want from Islam? What is his expectations from Islam? And he said, the day when a woman walks from Yemen to Makkah, loaded with jewelry, and nobody hurts her, nobody looks at her with the bad eye, or nobody, steals or touches her, if that's the justice I'm looking for, and just that's the real definition of Islam.
Thank you, Dr. Azam. I know we've gone way over time, 15 minutes, and if anyone in the audience has questions, burning questions they still want to throw at our distinguished panelists, we could probably send them by email to all three of them, and perhaps you'd be willing, or if you have time, to respond to some of these questions. Heather, I think that closes our open Q&A, and I'd like to so thank you for moderating that part of our morning, or now lunchtime, and I'd like to close things off with our president, Rashmi Gupta, president of the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council. So thank you to our three panelists for answering a lot of challenging questions and providing us with challenging answers.
Thank you very much, Rahil and Heather, Dr. Heather Eatons, for handling taking this whole panel very, very nicely and smoothly. It has been enlightening, engaging, and thought-provoking. And there's, I think I would really sincerely thank our speakers, panelists, Dr. al-Ninowy, Jeffry Halverson, and Faisal Khan for excellent presentations and thoughts which they have really put through. I learned a lot, and I'm going to think about it a lot. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. Again, thanks to our honored guests, Deputy High Commissioner of India and President of Carleton University, Dr. Benoit, and all of you for being here, which is why we have been able to make this thing. And Soni Azam, Dr. Soni Azam is really, thanks a lot for helping us in translating the panel during the panel, and you have been able to put so much time to really do this thing. Thanks very much. It was really very, very helpful. So again, with all the good words, I would say goodbye to everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day and the weekend.
Thank you, Rashmi.
Again, I have missed something, actually. I would like you to bring that. Dr. Homer, our host. Oh, gee, how forget bringing his point. I mean, he's the one who is really running the whole show behind the scene. He's controlling all these, thing on Zoom, as you all know. So thanks a lot, Dr. Homer and Anil Agarwal ji, for all your, help throughout.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks. Goodbye. And
thank you
and to Rahil and to Heather and to Sonu for all the work that you've done.
Thank you, and thank you, closing off, to our excellent panelists for taking time out of your busy day to enlighten us with your perspectives on this topic.
आप सबको भी बहुत-बहुत शुक्रिया आपका इतना अच्छा डिस्कशन ऑर्गेनाइज करने के।
आपको भी। Thank you, everyone.
Shukriya. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon.
भाई आपकी खूबसूरत उर्दू हिंदी बहुत अच्छी लगी सुनकर और बहुत अच्छा अनुवाद किया। Thank you.
Thank you. Shukriya.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.